You've clicked yourself into Three Guys and an iPad, the virtual water cooler of the mortgage industry. If this is not your intended flight, we'll give you a second to deboard. Okay. For those of you remaining, I'm Brian Rieger. I'm one of the aforementioned Three Guys. And I'm here, of course, with my co-founder at Content Beacon, Rick Grant. Rick, how are you today, sir?
Doing great, Brian. Good to see you, as always.
Great to have you. And we, of course, would not be Three Guys without Kevin Breeland of Amplify in Austin, Texas. Kevin, how you feel today?
I feel great. Thank you for asking, Brian.
Well, it's great to have you. Now, this is the point on our little podcast where I make my shameless plug for Content Beacon, the top B2B content marketing firm in the mortgage industry. If you'd like to learn more about us, if you'd like to put together a podcast like this or even better, or if you'd even just like to be on this show or you have a topic you'd like to have our great experts discuss, just contact us, Rick or myself. We're in the show notes, Brian at contentbeacon.com or Rick at contentbeacon.com. So with that, let's get on to our show. We've got a great panel here today. We're going to be talking about the future of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, affectionately known as the CFPB. And we've got a very special guest headlining today. She comes to us from the greater Atlanta area. She's a longtime president and shareholder with the law firm Franzen and Salzano, which specializes in consumer financial services law. She's also been a featured speaker at numerous conferences and on numerous webinars. Pleased to welcome Loretta Salzano. Loretta, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be the gal with the guys.
Well, you're right about that. And that is something we have planned to address even more in the future. Loretta is the first gal to join us. She will not be the last. And hopefully, this will not be her last time here either. We'll welcome you back anytime you like, Loretta. Thanks for coming. We've also got just a couple of other well-known attorneys on the show. It's a big topic. We've had a big decision. So we've brought out all the big guns today. Our next special guest has joined us, what, 18 times now, Chuck? 18, 19 times now?
Something like that. I've lost track.
Me too, but you're welcome back another 18 times. Of course, he's the Executive Vice President with WFG National Title. He's hailing from Cincinnati, Ohio, and he's there today, I believe. Welcome, Chuck Cain.
Thank you.
And
hello to everybody.
Well, it's great to have you here. And our next special guest has joined us maybe one less time, so that would be 17, I believe. He's of counsel for Cat and Temple. And if you haven't read it, I'm going to plug it again. He's the author of Mortgage Musings, one of the best blogs in the industry, and maybe the only blog ever to cite The Princess Bride, and not the famous quotes either. Brian Levy in Milwaukee, welcome.
Thanks, Brian. Always good to be here.
And now we have another special guest. This is only his second time here. He's a nationally known attorney for the mortgage and settlement and consumer finance industries. He's the managing attorney at Sterbcow Law Group. He's coming to us from New Orleans today. And welcome back, Marx Sterbcow.
Thank you, Brian. The check did clear this time.
I was wondering about that. And for those of you who haven't seen the first episode, Marx, I'm amazed Marx came back, because every time Marx has been on the show, he's had bad luck befall him. He was on one of our earliest podcasts. Great show. Go back and check it out if you haven't had a chance. And poor Marx came down with COVID-19 not long after that. It did not go away quickly, but thank God he survived and appears to be thriving again. So we took our chances and brought Marx back for a second show. And if you don't remember seeing that, it's because he never made it on. Marx got into a car accident somewhere on his way to his recording studio or whatnot, and that kind of put him out of commission again. So my real question for you, Marx, is, are you okay?
Doing fantastic. Now I'm looking forward to a very positive second half of 2020. Can't get any worse.
Amen to that. Amen. So as you can see, we've got an entire Zoom cast here of great experts. So you're not here to hear me talk. Let's get right on with it. And Loretta, I am going to start with you, and I'm going to invite all the attorneys to jump in. But we've had a big decision lately from the Supremes, and that is CELA Law versus the CFPB. If you guys could kind of, Loretta, starting with you, if you could kind of walk us through that decision, how did it come about? We don't need the, keeping in mind that we do have plenty of viewers who are not attorneys, but walk us through why this case is important, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I always go with the KISS method. So keep it super simple or keep it simple stupid, right? Whichever you prefer. And sorry, audience. So seal of law, in essence, received a civil investigative demand from the CFPB, which is a subpoena from the CFPB for it to produce records. And in response to, in essence, an investigation, a civil investigative demand. And seal of law pushed back and said that the CFPB was unconstitutional and didn't have the authority. So the CFPB took it to court, and the court ordered seal of law to respond, and then they appealed again to the Court of Appeals, and Court of Appeals ordered seal of law to respond, and to that, they petitioned the Supreme Court, who accepted the case and just ruled. And I guess to put it in a nutshell, there were two things that the CFPB was deciding. One, that the court was deciding. One, if the CFPB is constitutional because it has a single director, removable only for cause, as opposed to at the will of the president. And if that were the case, if it would be enough or possible for the court to order the change in the president's removal power, so that as long as the president could remove the director at will, the CFPB could continue. And so those were the two things the court was deciding. And Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, delivered the opinion, which was a 5-4 split decision on the issue of the constitutionality. And in essence, what the court decided is that the CFPB is in fact unconstitutional because of the for-cause removal of the director, but that it's okay to sever and change and reform that, in essence, so that as long as the director is removable at the will of the president, it will remain intact. And that portion of the decision was also split, but it's 7-2. So the court spent a lot of time talking about the history of different types of agencies and authority, and really spent a lot of time focusing on the incredible powers of the director of the CFPB, the power to impose enormous, their word was daunting monetary penalties. They also were concerned about the absence of the usual appropriations. So that gives the CFPB a lot of financial freedom that most agencies don't have. And they really weren't willing to make an exception for the CFPB as they have for other authorities in very limited cases. In fact, Chief Justice said, to really put it in a nutshell, such an agency has no basis in history and no place in our constitutional structure. And so with that, the court moved on to the question of whether it would be okay for them to really just tweak how the CFPB operates. So now going forward, the CFPB director is removable at the president's will. And the idea is that will allow its regulations to stand and allow it, in theory, to continue its work.
Fantastic. And Loretta, I've got to confess, if we were in law school, the professor would wrap up the class and walk away. That was very thorough. So I'm going to ask you in a sentence or two, for the non-attorneys, what does this mean? What does this mean if I'm a mortgage banker? What does this mean in the industry and I'm just tuning in?
Sure. Well, I think it means a few things, right? Immediately upon the publication of the decision, the CFPB director ratified everything that's happened, in essence, since the CFPB was formed, in order to, as she said it, to provide certainty that things will continue to rock along. Now, just because she did that doesn't necessarily mean that others won't disagree or that there will be challenges by those who are involved in enforcement actions now or in investigations. And it doesn't mean that someone wouldn't try to somehow set aside the regulations that the CFPB promulgated under its prior structure. But I think that latter is unlikely to happen. I mean, I think for people who are already in litigation, maybe this will give them some fodder, and I look forward to hearing from what the litigators have to say. I'm a compliance lawyer, not a litigator. And I didn't find this particularly surprising. You know, the director even said herself, and the Department of Justice said that they thought the CFPB structure was unconstitutional. So when the head of the director who has that authority says that, it's not a surprising result. Certainly, I think that it will make it more challenging for the CFPB to operate at the fringe, as it did under its first director, Director Cordray, because it'll be easier for a president to get rid of them. And I think that if the president had that authority, if Trump had that authority with Cordray, he could have been gone much quicker. So it certainly politicizes the position in a way that it hadn't been as political before. And it does rein in the director in a way that the director wasn't reined in before, I think. So for now, I think that's what will happen with the CFPB, just how it can act unilaterally. I think, and again, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone who's been keeping their finger on the pulse, there has been an outcry or a plea for a commission as opposed to a director really since the CFPB was formed. And there's a bill pending now in Congress, and the industry really has been rallying for a commission. And I think that will be a way to depoliticize the director position and allow different administrations to have a contribution in how the CFPB operates going forward. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, and certainly not before the election. After the election, depending on what happens, then, you know, it is possible we'd be sitting in a very different place with a different director.
Well, Loretta, you make a great point there, and I have a feeling we're going to be coming back to the support or lack thereof of this administration versus perhaps the future. Before we dive a little deeper into that, though, I want to pause for a second and see if any of our other guests would like to comment in general on the case and the current state of the CFPB.
Look, Brian, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. The case I found very interesting, and maybe I'm going to get a little wonky on the Supreme Court and constitutional issues here, but the decision was a 5-4 decision that the agency was unconstitutional, and that's the slimmest majority that you can have. So the minority, 4 of the 9 justices, felt that the agency was constitutional, and the other 5 felt that it was not. And it really had to do with it was simply too far removed from accountability of the electorate to be a constitutional form of government that can make decisions that affect the citizens. So far removed that, you know, as citizens, we couldn't control it. Then you have a bigger majority saying that, well, if you remove this issue, if you allow the president to remove the director at will instead of only for cause, that somehow cures the constitutional defect. But what's interesting is you have to take the 4 justices who dissented on the question of constitutionality and add their votes to 3 of the justices who said it was unconstitutional to come up with this severability idea. And I just find it very interesting that they can sort of borrow from the other votes to be able to, when they said, well, we think it's constitutional, but we also think it's severable. So they thought it was constitutional, so they wouldn't have severed and they wouldn't have changed anything. Yet they use those votes, and those count towards the decision to allow it to be severed. I just find that really interesting. If you read the dissent by Thomas and Gorsuch, they're saying, look, it's unconstitutional, and you can't sever this issue because this was fundamental to the agency's creation by the Congress in the Dodd-Frank Act. And if you have something that's fundamental, you can't just sever it, even though the law itself allows you to do that. And what's interesting, if you sort of read the tea leaves, is part of the reason that the Kagan dissent also concurred with the severability piece is she's looking ahead to something that has nothing to do with the CFPB. She's looking ahead to the Affordable Care Act and the case involving which is what they call the universal mandate, which is the requirement that everyone has to pay something towards health insurance under Obamacare. And what happened was the Congress severed that. Here we have the severance issue again. They severed that recently from Obamacare. So now there is no requirement for everybody to pay something or a penalty in the tax code is the way it works. And so the question is, Obamacare, is it still valid because you severed something fundamental to it? That case will be coming before the court shortly, and you can imagine how Justice Kagan and the members of the dissent will decide on the severability question.
Brian, we'll come back to that severability a bit. I want to see if Chuck or Marx or any of the other three guys or Loretta have any other comments on that.
Well, I'll just say I agree. Well, say both as to what Loretta and Brian said, and I think that Brian made a good point that this seems to be maybe an early move in a much bigger chess game at the Supreme Court involving various federal entities that have a single director versus some sort of a panel directorship, the ACA. It seemed that there were a lot of points, as I read the opinion, that didn't need to be in the opinion. It was like they were building an argument for something else that was about to happen or is going to happen soon. But I do think that the one thing that came out of this that I think is very detrimental to the business community is that if we have a single director who can be removed by the president at will, that we could have a swinging pendulum of enforcement. Somewhere between Maxine Waters and Steve Bannon. It's depending on who the president is and depending on the mood at that point in time. So I think it didn't give business a lot of solace because at least when you had the 5-year directorship that, we may not like it, but we can plan for it. We can build it into our systems. We can figure out what we're going to do next. Now it's going to be like, well, on January 21st, we may have something that's completely different. We may have a complete change in attitude. One thing which probably coincidentally was announced with the ratification was elevating Tom Paul to be the deputy director at the Bureau. He has a long history of being very much in support of the debt collection industry and the payday lenders, the check cashing industry. So he's definitely a Trumpian, and he's just been moved up to deputy director, perhaps only for a few months or perhaps for 4+ years. So I think this is going to be very difficult for business to navigate and plan because every 4 years, it could be a whole different change in attitude.
Well, I want to seize on that point for a second here, Chuck. Marx, I'm going to put you on the spot, and then Loretta, I want to come back to you because you mentioned this earlier too. So, Marx, is that the biggest effect of this ruling, of this holding, the politicization, I guess, of the CFPB? Are we in for a swinging pendulum every 48 years now?
I mean, you could argue based on some of the cases that the Bureau's taken right now, some of the enforcement actions that they're currently moving forward with, that there's politicization in the process already. So, I mean, I've seen some really crazy cases, some insane theories that the Bureau is pursuing, particularly in fair lending, that just defy logic. So, and not just that industry, home alarm security companies and things where you kind of go, where is that jurisdiction? So I do think that it's certainly going to increase the ability for politicization to come in, but at the same time, I think there definitely needs to be a multi-member board. But if it's fireable by the president, if you have a rogue group within the Bureau that's pushing agendas, you can get rid of that director and put someone else in place to muzzle that sort of that more radical sort of agenda that some in there may have. But I do worry about the current structure going forward, because I can definitely see it becoming even more political, even more dangerous for the Bureau to follow the rules and regs and understand what they have to abide by.
And Loretta, I want to come to you on that. You mentioned before, and you had mentioned, in fact, to some degree, that the Trump administration did have maybe not its thumb on the scale, but there was a glaring silence in support of the CFPB from this administration as the case wound its way forward. So is that the biggest impact here? Are we in for a CFPB that looks radically different every 4 to 8 years?
Well, I worry that it could look radically different even more frequently than every 4 years. I mean, look at the turnover in the cabinet, right? So 4 years is a long enough window when we think we already had a 5-year term anyway for the CFPB director, and at least you can plan, to Chuck's point, a little bit. But if things are changing even more frequently, or at the whim of the president, or in response to certain actions that are deemed inappropriate, or it could be even more frightening. And that goes both ways, right? Not only who's being scrutinized, but who's being left to run rogue. Now, I do believe that the CFPB will remain true to a focus on consumer harm, but we've seen, just with the different tack taken by Director Cordray, who was very aggressive and willing to forge new territory and try to rewrite even statutes, let alone, tinker with regulations, or and was very adverse to giving direction to the industry in a way that we had come to enjoy under the leadership of HUD on certain issues and other regulators. And then certainly we see now a shift in approach. But it could happen even more frequently. And I think that's what's frightening. And for business, certainty is what we need. And I know, as a lover, not a fighter, as a compliance attorney, that's what our clients want to hear. Even if they don't really like the rule, at least they can plan for it, they can build systems around it. But if this is changing any time and it's unpredictable, so a lot of what we do is not just interpret laws, but assess risk. And much of it has to do with what we see the CFPB doing, whether it's formal or not, where they're looking. To Marx's point, who are they investigating? Where do we know they're peeking under the covers? So that helps the rest of us to advise our clients and assess both the risk of detection and what's going to happen if we do get that knock on our door. And as it becomes more politicized, that's going to be more and more challenging.
Well, great point there. And Brian, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on this as well. Loretta made a fantastic point about the business level uncertainty. This is not an industry that likes uncertainty. This is an industry that hunkers down when there's uncertainty. And now, in the midst of everything else, we've got political and enforcement uncertainty. So Mr. Levy, do you believe that's kind of the biggest impact of this holding? I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this one.
Well, to be honest, Brian, I was going to talk about when Loretta was talking about the Cordray era and Richard Cordray's actions as director. I was thinking she was being very diplomatic in describing how he was behaving. I mean, I think what the court has said is he was behaving in an unconstitutional fashion, and that it's impermissible, that we can't have government acting in a way that is not accountable to the people in some fashion in accordance with the Constitution. We've got 3 branches of government. We've got a Constitution that describes how those branches of government are supposed to operate. And he was issuing laws, deciding laws, making penalties. He was doing all kinds of things that just fundamentally were contrary to our Constitution. And so he was sort of the prime example of why you need to enforce constitutional restrictions on any government agency. I don't think that the current director has been acting in any way, similar. And you'd hope that any director wouldn't use powers, even if they're granted, that go beyond what they should from a constitutional perspective. You'd hope that they would be more judicious in using those powers. But I really just feel that it was time to rein in that agency because of the way that Cordray had been acting. And but I'm not sure that the severing of this one issue is really what accomplishes it. I agree with I think it was Marx or maybe Chuck who was talking about the commission. I think that's exactly the way that we should resolve this. It seems to work pretty well with the FTC. They've got a commission. It works with the SEC. They've got a commission. And we don't have these kinds of problems arising where the industry is jumping up and down saying, we're getting new rules without notice. We're getting punished for things that we had no idea were wrong. That's the kind of thing that the Constitution is designed to prevent. And we'll see what happens with, this idea that the president is now the ultimate accountability measure.
And Brian, to your point, under Director Cordray, I heard frequently at conferences the term rulemaking by enforcement or regulation by enforcement, or maybe I'm slightly misstating that. So you're not the only one to say that. It's an excellent point. I want to stay with you for a second, though, because it's come up a few times, and I believe you're one of the first who mentioned it. Severability. So the Supremes talked a little about the severability and disagreed about that. Maybe this is a little tangential to severability, but I think someone mentioned that there's already a bill in Congress addressing the structure of the CFPB, if I heard correctly. So I'm going to start with you, and then I want to let Loretta weigh in and let Mr. Cain back in too. But do you see Congress weighing in again on this? How much, or do you think we're going to see a real addressing of the Dodd-Frank Act, which of course created the CFPB in the first place? What's kind of the near-term future here for the state of the law itself?
Predicting Congress to take any action right now is a pretty risky prediction. There's no functionality right now in Washington in the legislative branch. They seem virtually incapable of doing anything that even is just common sense. And in this case, common sense would dictate creation of the commission that we were just talking about. And that, I know there's a bill pending on that. There's been bills pending on that for years, frankly, to revise Dodd-Frank on that point. But I had sort of, before this decision came down, predicted that maybe the Supreme Court would tell Congress, by virtue of sort of kicking this case based on just the CID issue, and not deciding the constitutional issue, but in concurrences tell Congress, look, we've got another case coming involving the FHFA, which is a very similar structure, single director. We will decide that based on the numbers of this concurrence in a way that decides that's unconstitutional because it's more directly on point. And so if you don't do something about this with the CFPB and FHFA, this is what's going to happen when that case comes before us, to sort of put the gun to their head. They didn't do that. They just came out and said you can separate. So I don't think Congress is going to do anything, to be honest. I'd like to see the commission. I really would. But I just don't think they've got the political strength to move forward on just about anything today.
Okay, which could mean a lot of volatility. Loretta, Marx, or Chuck, thoughts on that?
I think it's an attention issue, right? I mean, Brian's right. They're paralyzed unless they're forced to act in response to an emergency. So I don't expect anything to happen soon, and certainly before the election. And it's possible afterward, depending on what happens and how hard the industry pushes that bill. If it comes to their attention, I think they'd be inclined to go with it. You know, the CFPB was formed in response to an emergency, right? Another crisis. And even Elizabeth Warren, who was the founder, thought up the CFPB, and Obama didn't contemplate that there would be a single director with that much power. So I think it would be very reasonable for Congress to go with the commission. It's what is generally, to Brian's point, we see from a regulatory perspective. It allows more predictability. It allows staggered terms. It allows different administrations to have an impact in a way that will normalize or at least slow the pendulum swings that Chuck referred to that are not good for our industry and create chaos and uncertainty, at least. So I think that that's a reasonable thing to happen, but I don't think it's high on Congress's list. And unless someone really clamors, and I guess perhaps that could be in response to this director, I think that unlikely, but maybe another director doing something, or a president acting rashly to remove the CFPB director in response to either an action or inaction the president found undesirable. That too could create some urgency and cause Congress to act. But somebody's going to have to bring it to the forefront. I think there's going to have to be some precipitating event that makes it a priority for Congress.
Well, I've got to be a little grim, and I'm going to turn this one to Marx and to Chuck. And just as a simple layperson here, what I'm hearing is that we're in for 4, 6, 8, 10 years of volatility, of changing agendas, of constantly changing directors and who knows what else, and a Congress unwilling or unable to act. Marx, Chuck, keep me from jumping off the cliff here. What do you see?
I mean, I think it's all going to depend on this presidential election. I think if Trump is reelected, I think you'll see kind of the status quo of what we're seeing now. If you have if Biden gets elected, then you will have a full seat change over at the Bureau. And if that's the case, I don't see any appetite for the Democrats to want to limit their power over the Bureau if Biden gets in. I mean, that would be, why would they want to constrain themselves? And I'm sure Elizabeth Warren, who will probably have the real goal, the hand picking of who the successor at the Bureau will be, to put on that plate, she's not going to want to stymie them either. So the only way I could see any potential compromise would be if the Democrats believe that Trump is going to get reelected, and they start seeing it in the polling as we get maybe another month or two closer to the election. Maybe then, well, let's go ahead and kind of put a committee up. But absent that, I just don't see it.
Well, a great point. And of course, a reminder to those who might have forgotten, Elizabeth Warren, CFPB was the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren originally, and many thought she would be the original director. Chuck, do you see something similar here? 4, 6, 8 years of either, just kind of depending on who wins the election, that's the CFPB?
I would agree. I think nothing is going to happen between now and the election. I think, absent some dramatic change in where we are right now, I don't think you get the CFPB. I don't think a farm bill could get through Congress right now. And then, depending on the election, if we have status quo, the Democrats will stop anything at the House level from changing the Bureau, if nothing else, just to stop Trump from whatever he wants to do. And to Marx's point, take the White House and perhaps take the Senate. Why would they want to change this?
Okay.
In fact, my guess is we will see someone step in that will want to reverse of the Bureau.
Interesting. All right, now I want to take a little bit of a left turn here, and I'm going to call in one of the three guys to start here, Kevin Breeland, since he is our mortgage, he is our lender in residence. Take this more in a business direction now. We've had some great analysis of the law and perhaps the future of the entity, and I'd invite us to come back to that. But, Kevin, as you sit here and listen to these esteemed attorneys kind of dissecting the case and the future for the CFPB, what are your thoughts as a mortgage lender? You run a mortgage bank. How are you feeling about your compliance program? How are you feeling about what's coming? And then I'm going to go back to the attorneys and ask what you're talking to your clients about in terms of preparing for this.
When I read the ruling and after listening to what our esteemed panel have to say, the thing that comes to mind for me as a loan officer in dealing with the public every day is, what is our non-QM world going to look like if we have an ever-changing director? Currently we're supposed to be limiting to about 43% DTI, but QMs are going higher than that right now because of the safe harbor that we have for that. But if you get somebody in, and I'm not going to say it's like Elizabeth Warren, but if you get someone in who has very strong feelings about consumer protection, I guess that'd be the way to put it. Very strong feelings about consumer protection, and says, there is no way that anyone can live comfortably if over 40% of their gross income is going to house and debts, then you could see a constraint of the market quickly. And let's look at the market on a more national level. There are some areas such as New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle, where the average price of a house is well over $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, where 40% DTI may not even get you in the ballpark. I mean, there are some areas of California that, from an underwriting standpoint, back in 2002, we were considering 50% DTI okay because of the price of housing. And while we've seen some of the results of that type of approach, the reality of it is that housing prices haven't gone down. No one is buying a house to lose money. No one is taking that approach. So I think that's where the threat is in the contraction of credit, because people who believe we need to protect ourselves from ourselves will contract that to a point to where you can almost legislate no fault. And that I think that would be the direction.
Very interesting. I'm going to throw this as a toss-up to the entire panel, whoever would like to jump in. If you'd like to either kind of dovetail on Kevin's thoughts, or as an attorney, what are you going to be telling your clients when they come to you and hear this assessment of the ruling, hear this assessment of what we're looking at over the next few years? What kind of things can, whether it be mortgage lenders or title companies or whatnot, anyone in the industry, what can or what should or is there anything they should be doing to kind of prepare for this?
I'll take that real quick. I think the big piece right now that I think lenders and really the whole industry needs to be careful of are going to be the new fair lending new fair lending standards and laws that are coming in, and as that is rapidly transforming right now as to word usage and use of the word Washington or Lee or just plantation or master bedroom, things that you wouldn't have ordinary, just kind of their ordinary societal terms that have been turned on their head. I think that fair lending is equally going to undergo a real rapid change, and that's going to be very scary for you. A lot of lenders out there that are think everything is kind of normal, but it's not.
Interesting, Marx. Do any of our other guests want to comment on that, kind of this possible related uptick in maybe a tightening of the regulatory scheme?
Well, to sort of bring Marx's point and Kevin's points together, the CFPB just recently came out with a proposal to amend the Ability to Repay Act, or Ability to Repay law under Truth in Lending, and modify the definition of a qualified mortgage, a QM. To Kevin's point, the question is what's going to be the impact of that on the availability of credit? Because one of the things that I think you can empirically see is since we instituted the qualified mortgage rules, we've actually seen a shrinking of home ownership, particularly among minorities. And so, is there a cause and effect there between those regulations, making it more difficult for minorities to get loans? And will this new proposal, which is going to be price-based and not based on debt-to-income ratios, will that have an effect of expanding that or not? I don't really know. It hasn't really been discussed, but I think that from a societal perspective, and this we may be getting a little far afield from the discussion about what's the CFPB's role, but we've had no growth whatsoever in minority home ownership since redlining was legal. There's the racial gap between blacks and whites in America in home ownership remains at about 30%. And that's just hard to believe that 50 years later, when, with fair lending enforcement and all these regulations and consumer protection and all these things put in place to help home ownership and to help consumers, that we've made no progress as a nation on closing that gap. So, I don't know where that all goes, but I think we will have a lot more discussion on that going forward.
I think you make a great point. There are several great points, Brian, and which raises the question to the efficacy of the fair lending statutes and fair lending scheme. Not to question that whether there should or shouldn't be, but how effective have they been? I'm going to ask Loretta, but anyone else can jump in as well. So, do you agree we're in for a kind of an increase in legislative, regulatory activity? Maybe someone used the term activism. Is that what we're in for? And if so, what are you telling your clients to do to prepare for that?
Well, I haven't gotten that far yet to digest it to figure if we're in for activism. I mean, fair lending and diversity has always been pet causes of mine, and I've been so disheartened by everything I've been reading as part of my white privilege, educating myself, re-educating myself, fascinating things about what have led to the housing disparity between the races. And it's horrific. And so I would not be surprised, again, very far afield from what the CFPB might do, but the CFPB has been instrumental in driving change in the fair lending piece, and they can do that through examination, enforcement, and harnessing what is the tools already at their disposal. And I would not be surprised to see that as a way to try to close that gap. But at the same time, we're marrying that with all of these events over the past years that have constricted the credit market, the ability to repay rule, COVID, did, what happened on the secondary markets and the margin calls and all these different things that happen that have really made the market more and more narrow, and lots of lenders leaving the, because of the laws, not offering bond loans, not offering the loans with down payment assistance. We've seen this split at FHA over the past several years, the compare ratio side and enforcement, and the efforts to expand fair lending or expand housing and those types of programs, and the risks to lenders. And now with the LO comp rule and the difficulties and challenges in paying loan originators for loans, we've seen more and more lenders leaving that. So all these things that have been happening either through legislative efforts or regulatory efforts or the enforcement efforts, and then just what's happened societally, have made it more and more challenging for people of color to get loans. And whenever I'm encouraged, I feel like we take one step forward and 3 steps back. There was a time maybe 5 years ago when I felt really strongly that we would see alternate credit models. We would see a move to other type of criteria, not just your FICO score, and other things, factors that will help people of color obtain loans. And none of that's happened. I think that all of the events, whatever is fueling them or triggering them, have brought us farther and farther away from that goal. So certainly in response to what's happening at the CFPB, I think it's too early for us to do anything or tell our clients anything differently. I think we'll just be moving along just as we have for some time. But in response to the impact of COVID and the racial tensions, I think Marx is right. This is something that it's more important than ever. I never thought about the master bedroom, but I live in Georgia, and some of my friends are changing the names of their corporations to remove the word plantation. I can assure you of that. And I never thought about these other ramifications, but I think it's very important for us to be sensitive to words that are just part of the vernacular and think about the downside of what those words might mean to lots of folks.
Very interesting. Very
Could
interesting.
I piggyback on that just a second?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Kevin.
One of the things that I've seen change in my 41 years of doing this is that as we've gotten more sophisticated in how we price loans for the secondary market and how they have become investment tools through mortgage-backed securities and all of these different things that have gone on over this time period, one of the things that has occurred that is always an issue for me, but no one else seems to care that much, is loan level price adjusters. And loan level price adjusters is exactly what prices minorities out of the housing market. And here's why. Here's the example. You can take a person with a 640 FICO score who is a minority, who works a labor position but makes enough money to qualify for a house that could be, say, $200,000. But then when you price that loan out, you get hit with the 640 FICO score, you get hit with the different things that go along with your loan level price adjusters, such as first-time home buyer and different things of that nature. And the next thing you know, you have a loan that should be somewhere around 3.5%, now at 4.25%. Or the customer has to come up with like $5,000 in cash just to pay the loan level price adjuster to keep the 3.5% rate. And this happens quite frequently to minorities. And honestly, it happens quite frequently to first-time home buyers. They literally get priced out of a market because in Austin, for example, if you qualify for $220,000, I can tell you that you're going to be living somewhere about 40 miles from where you work, if you're lucky.
Wow.
But if your loan level price adjusters take you down to 190, you need to move to another town. because you're not going to find anything. And I'm sure that that's the situation in Atlanta. I'm sure it's the same in New Orleans. I'm sure it's the same in Cincinnati and Milwaukee. As these towns grow and grow and grow, and we have, businesses coming in, and we all want to be prosperous, those are the people that are paying the biggest price. I mean, Fannie Mae has a home ready product that I can tell you right now, if a customer qualifies for home ready but has a 645 FICO score, you will not get a DU approval. You just won't. And that is what's happening to minorities, to first-time home buyers, to our children. That's what's going to happen. I mean, Loretta's son is moving on now. He's going to be going to college, and after that, going to work. This is what he's going to have to deal with. And
we're Italian. He can live in my basement. You know how we are.
Well, yeah. I mean, he'll be there. Carlo will be there forever because he just loves his mother to death. But once Rob decides that it's time to cut loose here.
Rob already lives in the basement. He'd have to move out.
Yeah. So, but we do have that. I mean, exactly what our has become multi-generational housing. I mean, Dr. Deborah Burke, if you read her Wikipedia page, she lives in a multi-generational house with her parents and her children, and she's my age. So
it's becoming more common.
That's the outcome.
And I will mention to our viewers, this is an important conversation. We're going to continue it throughout the weeks. I'd also suggest you go back. We had a great conversation with Sean Graham just a few weeks ago on some of these points. So I'd encourage you, if this is your first podcast or the first time you're tuning in, please check that one out too. There's a lot of things that need to be discussed out there. I just have one more question for our esteemed panel. And it's several folks on the panel have taught me this. I know, Brian, you've mentioned it. Marx, you've mentioned it. I think Trip Riley did too. We've been talking mostly about the CFPB, but I want to ask if there's any indirect, the CFPB and state enforcement are two different things. But anytime I ask an attorney what to look out for or what lenders should be watching out for, they always come back to, well, not just the federal, let's come back to the state enforcement. So is there any kind of indirect or directional change you could see an increase in terms of state enforcement, state regulatory? We mentioned the potential for increased legislation or the increased enforcement or whatnot. So I'm going to ask the panel, I'll toss it up to you. Do you foresee this Supreme Court ruling having any kind of indirect impact on how the various state agencies go about overseeing lenders, title insurers, whatnot?
I think not in the short term. The states react to what's happening at the federal level in two ways. Certain regulators will follow suit, right? They take whatever the director is doing as sort of the rally cry, and then they follow suit. And then the flip side too is when we see a shift in the CFPB move away from certain areas, then the states will move in to fill the void. So it's oftentimes very reactionary until we see what happens with the CFPB and how its focus and direction change. I think it's going to be difficult to predict.
Well, I mean, I think you've seen some changes already. So when the CFPB leadership changed, some of the states became more active, wanted to create their own mini CFPBs within each state, California, Pennsylvania, maybe a few others. The one in California kind of got set aside when the COVID virus hit, and they kind of focused on that, and that's where the states are focused right now. If we project forward, and there's a more aggressive CFPB director, more akin to Cordray than to Kraninger, the states may not feel as necessary for them to be as aggressive. So it's just one of these things you got to stay tuned on.
Well, folks, we've covered quite a lot of ground today, and of course, we could do this. We could make this a 3-day conference if we wanted to. But if my panel will tolerate me, indulge me, we're going to do something a little different here. Our final segment here on Three Guys in an iPad, and for the first time ever, we're going to play What's on Your Desk. Before the show, as we were speaking today and getting prepared, I just wanted to make sure everyone saw the attorneys being thrown a curveball at the same time. So what we're going to do here, and I think we're going to do this again and again if Rick doesn't edit it out. Most of our guests are in home offices, although I believe, Marx, you're in your business office. Brian, I know you're in your business office.
Me too.
But we all have little mementos on our desks. And, of course, I don't know about you guys. I'm almost tired of Zoom calls at this point, even though things are reopening a little bit. So let's bring a little life into this. Loretta, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Loretta Salzano,
Okay.
What's on your desk?
If I were smart enough, I could turn the camera. So I'm at my work office. I have my handy dandy Wonder Woman doll my husband gave me, a bracelet my friend gave me. I also have a little statue of my family. And I have some race cars because I do like to drive race cars. And my queen crown and rhinestones all here with me.
Wow.
And finally, this nice picture of me with my girl Carnisha in the photo booth at Tootsie's. I think this was a Rustboro meeting. Very elegant.
Very nice, Loretta. All right, Chuck Cain, you're on the spot. What's on your desk? I'll mention, Chuck, I think your bandwidth got a little low. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but I do believe you were mentioning your Magic 8 Ball, which governs all underwriting decisions at your company. Is that what you said? Just speak up if not. Nah, I'm only.
Yes, I apologize. Bandwidth is low too. But the Magic 8 Ball usually shows up Outlook hazy is what tends to show up.
Fantastic. Kevin Breeland, what's on your desk?
Well, I'll reference one thing here that I think is vitally important to everyday life. If you look over Brian's right shoulder there, he has a map of the United States. And of course, you know how I feel about this. If you're not from Texas, you're just from somewhere else. So, but this is what I have.
We've seen this hat, yes.
This might be the only college football we all see this year. So, just burn that into your mind.
Outstanding. I had a feeling you were going to go there.
Yeah, and I have my cup with my name on it. That's so I don't forget who I am.
Very good. Brian Levy, we know your wife made you clean out the office. Is there anything left?
Just have like a mouse. I mean, if you guys want to see my office, I'm going to give you a tour. So there's the poster of my. Where's the poster? There's the poster of my son in the High School Musical Shrek.
Outstanding.
Over here we've got the poster of Boston Marathon, and then all the other ego wall stuff that you have with all your other races. But the bobblehead collection, that's pretty good, right?
I'm a fan.
One of my favorite Norman Rockwell paintings of the Chicago Cubs, and then your usual pictures of the kids and the kids when they get older and they have beards. More kids, and then more ego wall with the diplomas. So that's the tour. You guys have just seen the entire office.
Brian has a big office.
Nothing else.
Brian, you win. Not only what's on your desk, what's in your
There's
office.
nothing on my desk other than more computers.
I like the tour, man. I like the tour. Rick Grant, you're on the spot. What's on your desk?
I got way too much crap to show you everything, but I'll just show you this rocket.
Rocket. Outstanding.
If I need advice, I go right here.
Well, I was only going to show you one thing, but now Kevin's forced my hands. I'll show you two. But the first thing, Brian, I like your bobblehead. And let's see if you guys can see him there. This is Jeff Manto. You have to be a real baseball fan to know who Jeff Manto is. Jeff Manta was one of the most mediocre major league players, and as a longtime Indians fan, in the early 2000s, he made his way onto the Indians teams, actually late 1990s. He was on the Indians team way too much for his skill set, and he was an all-star as a minor leaguer. He was the traditional 4A player, if you've ever heard that term. He is also...
Hey, Brian,
Yes.
Can you just give us the story in the show notes, please? This is enough.
I'm going to finish this story, my
Put
friend.
a link to his bio.
This is the traveling trophy for my fantasy baseball league, and it's been here 6 out of 10 years. So that's one. The other thing we've seen before, this is my 2014 Ohio State and NCAA championship memento football. And on that note,
Hold it up.
Oh, sorry about that. You want to see it? All right. So on that note, I'd like to thank our special guest for joining us today. Loretta Salzano, it's been a pleasure. If somebody would like to reach out to you, we'll put this in the show notes, but what's the best way to reach you?
Have them call me because my email is way too long to tell. It's 770-248-2881. Or if you just Google Loretta Mortgage Lawyer, I've been told I'll pop up.
You will. I'm sure you will for as many times as you've spoken out there and whatnot, and you're one of the best. So you're well deserved.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we hope you'll come back again many times.
Anytime.
An open invitation. Now, Chuck Cain, thank you for joining us. If they want to reach you, best email, best phone?
C. Cain at wfgnationaltitle.com.
Outstanding. And Chuck, again, we've got some bandwidth problems. We will be sure it's in the show notes. Mr. Levy, if they want to reach out to you, best way to do so?
blevy at catandtemple.com, or you can find my work at www.mortgagemusings.com.
And again, folks, take a moment to take a look at that. We'll include a link again, one of the best out there. Thanks for joining us, Brian. And finally, Mr. Sterbcow, you made it through the whole show, it seems. How can they reach you if they want to talk to you?
And just go to type in RESPA Lawyer on Google, and I'm sure that I will pop up several times.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for being here, Mark. Thanks to Rick and Kevin, as always. Thanks for putting up with my shenanigans. But Loretta, you may not know this. We recorded the show on a second-generation iPad that my daughter likes to play with, and apparently it wants to update to iOS 9 now. So, Mr. Grant, take us home.